Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
This episode of the Sports Spectrum podcast with Nate and Lexi Solder is brought to you by Compassion International. Childhood should be full of exploration, learning, and growth. But children in poverty are often focused simply on living day to day with safe water, education, medical care, even safe housing, being substandard or even non-existent, resulting in malnutrition, child labor, abuse, and hopelessness. But that's where Compassion International comes in. Poverty is such a vicious cycle, but it can be broken. And over 66 years of experience has allowed Compassion to be the most effective way to care for children in need and releasing them from poverty. And they do it through the local church. And they partner with more than 7,000 local churches in 25 countries to deliver God's love and care to children in need, one child at a time. More than 2 million children today are breaking the cycle of poverty for good through Compassion. We're going to talk about Compassion International a little bit with Nate and Lexi because they have a heart for seeing children being released from poverty. And you and I can both make that difference as well. For $38 a month, sponsor a child today through Compassion. Go to compassion.com/sportspectrum. Compassion.com/sportspectrum. Release a child from poverty and sponsor them through Compassion today. Today on the podcast, we welcome Nate Solder, the New York Giants offensive lineman, and his wife Lexi to the podcast. Of course, if you know Nate, selected in the first round of the 2011 NFL Draft by the New England Patriots, a two-time Super Bowl champion, blocking for Tom Brady, and then signed one of the largest contracts ever by an offensive lineman last year in March of 2018, and spent his first year away from New England in 2018 with the New York Giants. His wife Lexi and Nate have been together for a while now, and it was really fun to talk to both of these guys on the podcast, not only about the adjustment to a new team, having been in New England for so many years and then coming to New York and blocking for Tom Brady, and then coming over and blocking for Eli Manning and Saquon Barkley. And this interview, just so you guys are aware, because the Giants have made some moves since then, obviously with Odell Beckham being gone and some other moves that the Giants have made. This interview was taped before those free agency moves happened, so thus the questions that I asked didn't refer to those moves, didn't ask him about Odell Beckham leaving the team, of course, or I would have. But this interview was taped in late February of 2019, and it focuses on Nate's career and his journey, but also their story of faith and dealing with difficult times, their son Hudson battling cancer, and also, as I mentioned earlier, why they have such a passion and a yearning to see children released from poverty and partnering with Compassion International. So this is really great stuff. Nate and Lexi, you won't find more gentle, more kind people, just nice people than Nate and Lexi Solder. And I think you guys will enjoy hearing their story on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Let's take a listen. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Great to have you here on the podcast. Let's start with you, Nate. Talk football, I guess, in the beginning here. You finished your first season in New York with the Giants, blocking for Eli and Saquon, and wins and losses. It obviously didn't start well, but you finished well, I thought. But how would you assess that first year playing in New York? What was that like?
For me, it was a learning process. In New England, I had always done everything the exact same way. So very routine-based, very you could predict everything that was going to happen. And this was not that way. It was a whole new group of guys, so recreating a culture in that locker room, and that's real because it was like 70% new guys. So we were establishing what we thought was a winning culture, and that took time, and hopefully we can reap the benefits of that as we go forward. But I think as guys kind of settled in and got to know each other and kind of understood the game plan and kind of the way we went about business, we kind of got on the same page towards the end there. And we would have liked it to end better, but we were encouraged by a lot of things that happened this season.
That's good. Lexi, how about from the wife perspective? Switching teams, you're in New England for so many years and having a lot of success there, and then suddenly signing the new deal and you're going to New Jersey and you're a Giant. What was that like from the wife perspective?
Yeah, so in New England, it's interesting because everything is very established, and I think even just from the team that carries over to our Bible studies, to our couples study, everything we have wonderful people there. Yeah, charity events. It's like very consistent, same year, the same sort of story every year, and going to the Giants was much different. Like Nate said, it was a lot of new people. Which meant a lot of new women, and you don't really think going from team to team. You have that woman that's been there for a long time that is easy to ask questions, and everything from like what pediatrician do you use to what dentist to like how do I get to the stadium on game days. So that became a little bit harder to find. But it was great. I mean, we had an awesome first year. We did a women's Bible study every Thursday. And, we like consistently had like 8-9 girls that would show up.
That's
and,
great.
Even though it's super difficult with New York City traffic and no parking, and but people really, the women especially, made a huge effort to be there, and we had a really, really fun group.
What was the biggest adjustment for you, Nate, just as a player? You said you're routine based and culture and all that, but what was there? Was there something that it just kind of maybe surprised you in coming to a different team, a place you had been your whole career, and suddenly a new team? And what was the biggest sort of surprise or adjustment you had to make personally?
Well, when I left New England, I knew that the team that hired me was going to want me to be thrust into this role of leadership, bring the things that I'd done successfully, be the player that I'd been, and then put it right onto a big stage. New York, it was a lot. It was a lot for me to handle. I was elected as the PA rep. I was a team captain, so there was a lot of responsibilities for me, which I totally embraced. And I thought was amazing. Yeah. But it was something that was new. I'd always taken kind of the back seat to some of the other leaders that were on the team, and I was always just kind of rowing the boat. And when they asked me to get other guys to row and be a part of the yell staff or whatever it was, that was a little bit of an adjustment for me. Yeah, and
I got to ask from a on-field perspective, you play with Brady obviously for so many years, and probably the GOAT. I call him the greatest of all time. But you also came into playing with a pretty good quarterback in Eli Manning, who's going to the Hall of Fame, I would think, too. But also this incredible talent, Saquon Barkley. Yeah. It just from a sport, we have we're sports fans who are Christians, but we're still sports fans. Just watching him from afar, we were all shaking our head and marveling at how amazing he was. What was it like just being right there and blocking for him? Same kind of thing?
Usually he was zooming right past us, going to the end zone.
That's when you know you did your job. Right?
Yeah, he's so awesome. And a great teamate, too.
That's great.
I can't imagine the pressure he's under to be what he is, but he handled it with great grace. He was a good voice, a good positive voice in the locker room in times where it wasn't easy to be that. Yeah. And as a rookie, that said a lot about who he is. Obviously, I think his best football's ahead of him, because I think a lot of times he was just still kind of figuring things out.
Sure.
And that's a scary thought, but he's that natural ability that he can make people miss, and he can make big plays whenever, on any given play. So it's a lot of exciting things about him, and I was so thankful to be a part of that entire group. It's a group of very talented people.
Your former team is the Super Bowl champions, and I wonder, I'll start with you, Lexi. Was that hard to watch the Patriots win the Super Bowl when you're not there with them anymore? Or was it easier because you have so many friends there? What was that like?
Yeah, I would say it definitely wasn't hard.
Okay.
We enjoyed it. We had a Super Bowl party at our house, and we had a lot of our new friends from New York over. But I said to Nate a couple days after the Super Bowl, I said, we're watching the parade and all that stuff, which was personally my favorite part. But we're watching, and I said, I don't know, like I was so happy watching all of our friends and all these people, like the McCourtys, their story was awesome. And just people that we've played with for a long time and have great relationships with. I said, I don't think I would be any more happy if we were on that duck boat than I am watching now, just because we've already done that. And if we were there, I would just still be happy for the people that have never experienced it before. It's like, we've done this twice, and this would have been a third time, and it's like, I know what this is, but they don't, and to see them enjoy it so much was so fun.
Probably wouldn't have won had I been there.
Now, Nate, but what was that like for you as a player? I mean, same kind of feeling, like watching your boys win?
You know what? I thought that, I know the character of a lot of those guys. I know that what those guys go through to prepare. So it was not a surprise to me when they, had they 5 losses. Everyone says, this is a terrible team. I said, you guys just watch out.
Just watch.
I know who those guys are. I know how they go about their business.
Yeah.
So I was just happy for them. All the comments people made about the Rams being fun and the new wave and you know what? Sometimes there's old school smash mouth football gets it done. It was fun to watch.
We weren't crazy enough to think that like we were going to leave and then the Patriots weren't going to win. It was like that would be,
of course.
Like, you can put however many new people in there, and they'd always do well. So.
And not only that, we wanted them to do well. You know, all those guys we love, and we know how hard they work and everything.
I think that's a misnomer in the league too. That obviously there's rivals, and you want to beat your rivals and beat the teams that you don't, that are in your division.
Beating someone does not mean you don't want them to have healthy
That's
careers.
my point.
Things go well. You know what I mean? It's like, we'll just beat you, but then everything else you can do well.
Sure, but I think there's a real genuine. I mean, it's about the relationships, right? So much of this, and a lot of the fans don't see the relationships that are being built. And like, how could you root for your old team and try and win? Well, you guys are really close with a lot of those players, and you spent a good long time of your life around them, right?
And so many of those relationships are so much deeper than any given game, every given play. So you don't really worry about that. And there's a mutual respect. The harder you play, the harder I play. I respect you for that. You're out here doing it. So
of course,
we've been in like countless Bible studies with them, and just did life with those people for 8 years. I mean, the Slaters, like we got married together and had kids at the same time, and there's a lot of life lived in those 8 years outside of a couple of football games.
It's funny, side note, I was talking to Matthew, he's here at this conference that we're taping this interview, and I said, I don't think I've seen you so active in a game like that Super Bowl, because they punted like 7 or 8 times.
All over the place.
He's like, he even said to me, he's like, I don't get to usually play that much because the Patriots don't punt too often.
That's so fun.
It's funny, but he played great.
He did.
Nate and Lexi Solder are our guests here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. You guys just got back from Uganda. Literally a week ago, maybe even less than that. And Compassion International are near and dear to your heart. They're a sponsor on this podcast. We love Compassion, and we talk about how they are the most trusted child development. I'm going to go into full promotion mode here, but this is for real. They're the most trusted child development ministry in the world, and they release children from poverty. It's such a great ministry, and I wonder, let's start with why you got involved with Compassion, and then we'll talk a little bit about the trip in Uganda. So why Compassion? Why did that tug on your guys' hearts?
The thing I have to open up with is we're not sponsored by them. We're not paid by them.
No, you're not.
And everything, we're so positive about them, but I think initially getting to know them was such a leap of faith. We jumped right in with both feet. We said, hey, we agree with what you're doing. We're going to jump in knowing that there's the possibility of all sorts of fraud and all sorts of things that you worry about. Yeah. And our trip there, our 8 days meeting the group in Uganda and the national branch and the things that they're doing there and the type of people that are involved with it, I can't help but just root them on and want to do everything in my power to help that sort of organization. And seeing the things that they have to work in every single day, they're such better people, such better stewards with their money than I could ever be. So it was a misnomer for me to say, well, how can I trust you with this money? It's like, well, I'm not sure God should have trusted me with that money.
Yeah, It's true. Yeah.
So it really flipped my head on that thing. So we're the biggest cheerleaders we could possibly be, and I think that right now that's our role. I mean, we give financially, we give as much time on things like this that we can to support them, but the number of kids that they're really changing lives in communities, it's really, really phenomenal.
What about it, Lexi, for you? I mean, obviously this is a two-person effort here as husband and wife. So Compassion, when you heard about it, when you saw what they were about, why did that kind of tug on your heart?
I think it was just one of those things that, God kind of put Compassion in our lap at a time where we were really looking to do something like that. Maybe do some more work on a global scale. Yeah. And we were here at this conference last year, and we heard the Fergusons talk about Compassion, and then we met, we went to their little booth, and you could sponsor this kid, and that seemed awesome, but we just thought we could do more. So we looked into it. We had a lot of help with the Compassion staff, and it's just been one of those things that's been like a huge blessing to us, and hopefully we are to them. But going on this trip to Uganda was absolutely perspective changing, mind blowing.
What did you see? What was there?
Boy. So we went, so there were 5 projects that just kicked off that we helped start. So we went into Kampala, that's the largest city in Uganda, and we did some work there and just checking it out. I mean, we spoke on compassion for a while now and didn't really know what we were speaking about, so we wanted to go get our hands dirty and, like Nate said, dive in and really see what they were doing. So we went and we basically just bopped around for like 8 days and checked out all these different projects that they're doing. And by projects, I mean centers, like the child development centers and things like that. So each project has like a couple hundred kids that are sponsored or hopefully get sponsored eventually. Some of them, quite a few, still not sponsored. But, you know, so it's the sponsorship program, and they're sending these kids to school, paying their school fees. They are giving them meals. You know, every Saturday they feed them 2 meals, and they still do basically like a Saturday school sort of curriculum. Every child has health care, mosquito nets, things like that. We met one person who said he had malaria 12 times before he was 9 years old.
Wow.
And then he literally, when he got a sponsor for Compassion, he's like, I knew I was going to survive. Because they said, doesn't matter where are you, what you're doing. If you get sick, don't go to your mom, don't come to us, just go straight to the hospital and give them your Compassion number and you're taken care of. I mean, I could go on and on. There's like a million people that we met. But yeah, it was like a whirlwind of a trip. We
Compassion put a really great trip together for us, where we got to see the inner city slums and those sort of things. Then we got to go out into the outer limits of the country where people hadn't been reached yet, and they were just starting these new programs. So you're seeing people in grass huts and walking miles to go to school, walking miles to get fresh water, and what life is like currently today, which. Call it ignorance, but I had no idea that sort of lifestyle existed. And to see it and to smell it and to be a part of it and to touch it and to hug these people and to be a part of what a very small part, honestly, of what Compassion's doing. And they were so gracious with us. They had parades for us. They had celebrations for us. We're getting people give us speeches. We cut more cakes, celebration cakes than we could ever imagine. And just the wonderful culture, the wonderful people. It was really phenomenal. It really changed my whole belief system on these Americans are going to come save this country, and that's not the truth at all. I mean, luckily we have the means to kind of support them, but they have the know-how, they have the people power, they have the cultural structure to make the really great changes happen.
Yeah, the sponsorship program is $38 a month for those listening. It's food, education, medical care, and vocational training, but the key is it's all done through the lens of Christ. How did you guys witness faith in action by being in Uganda and Jesus kind of being able to be the hands and feet of Jesus and seeing how Christ being at the center of this thing has really taken shape?
It's such a critical element because in Africa and Uganda, there's a lot of witchcraft. So we saw things like a child becomes ill and sick, and the tribe will kick them out of the village because they believe it's a curse on the village. Or drown them, yeah.
Wow.
And so people are going in there saying, guys, this is Jesus. This is what he stands for. He believes every life is valuable. That's not something that they hear part of their culture. So it's a radical difference to what they're usually hearing. And these kids, as they learn the Bible, as they really become converted and become disciples, they're doing it to the next generation too. So instead of just some sort of support program that's getting people out of poverty, then they run off to some rich country and get a good job, they're staying into these communities because they believe in when you have something, you should give it away. They believe in generosity. They believe in giving back and rebuilding what they believe is the kingdom of God.
One of my favorite just sort of overlying things that happened while we were there was, we went around a lot of these centers and we're meeting the pastors and the church leaders and the project directors and all kinds of staff. And literally, I think every single person that we talk to, that we say like, you guys are doing a great job. We were there to encourage. You guys are doing awesome. This is amazing. We love what we see. The first words out of all of their mouths were, praise God.
Wow.
And they were like, it's not us. He's given us, like, we are so blessed to be in this situation. We're so thankful for Compassion. And they were like, praise God. It's great. They were like, this is awesome.
And in real practical ways, their faith is lived out. You'll see the older kids serving the younger kids. And it's a really patriarchal society. So men dominate and they're mistreating women, all those sort of things. But you see these compassion kids differently. You know, they're treating women properly. Women are getting jobs and doing things that they wouldn't have the ability to do. It's all because of Jesus. It's all because they believe in what the Bible says about Jesus.
I love that. Nate and Lexi Solder are our guests here on the podcast. A couple more questions with them. I want to ask you about facing trials, facing struggles. Obviously, your story a couple years ago came out with your son, Hudson, and battling cancer. First of all, how's he doing, and how is just what he's gone through? I think even maybe for some of our listeners, I don't think they know the full story maybe. Yeah. How's he doing? Can you share with us a little bit about what he's been going through?
So when he was 3 months old, he had these massive tumors in his kidneys that totally deformed his kidneys. So we went to chemotherapy, and they totally have shrunk down his kidneys to where they look normal, regular shaped, but he still has small tumors in there. So that's over 3 years, multiple rounds of chemotherapy, and 49 rounds of chemotherapy, and everything else that comes along with that.
Not that we're counting or anything.
Yeah, and everything that comes along with that, the trials and ups and downs of all that. So now we're at a point where we don't know if it's cancer, so we don't know if it's going to grow and spread, so they just monitor it and watch it. And the longer that they go without growing and they continue to shrink, the more hopeful we are that it's not if it is cancer, it's not a serious, one that's aggressive.
Yeah.
At least. So
he just had his most recent scan was like 2 weeks ago. Had an MRI, and it was all good results. His tumors had not grown, and so we do that. We do scans about every 6 weeks, and he's doing great.
That's really good.
3.5.
3.5.
Yeah.
That's a fun age.
Yeah, he is fun.
If anybody wants a 3.5.
Yeah.
Still the trials and struggles of just raising a 3.5.
Oh my gosh,
right?
yes.
He's a nut.
Tell me about your faith through this whole process and how it's helped you kind of work through just being parents of and going 49. You said you're counting 49. You're not counting, but you are counting. It's 49 rounds. Where does faith play a role in all this for you guys?
It's in my weakness that he is strong. When you're not able to do it, when you're not capable, when you don't have the emotional wherewithal to do it, he carries you through it. That was so vivid in this whole thing because there's nothing you can do when your child gets sick.
You have no control.
We pray. We don't have any control.
Yeah.
And even the doctors, they say, well, we don't know. And these are the best people in the world. This isn't out of ignorance. This is out of the most rigorous studies. They don't know what's going to happen. So it's all left up to God, and it's all up to His will. And I guess that just every day you say, is it going to grow? Is it not going to grow? Well, let's just keep trusting. One day at a time, you keep trusting. And that's been a really great exercise for our faith and our sanctification. And the other thing that's so vivid to us is how we had to give our one and only son. And my answer to that was no, thank you. I can't do that.
Yeah.
And to have a God that's so willing to give his only son for us who were unworthy, I couldn't be anything more than just grateful. And to give my life back to that is an easy sacrifice.
Yeah. Lexi, how about for yourself?
Yeah, I think, when he was first diagnosed, I think we went through maybe a short period of, questioning God, why him, why us, why all this. And I think that was fleeting for us. I don't think we really dwelled on that for very long. But then the part that I have found so interesting is how much, like, my overwhelming feeling, I don't know, the Holy Spirit, whatever, but about how his suffering, I truly, truly believe his suffering's for good. And I can't exactly say what that is or what that good is. I know Nate and I, and probably as a family, we parent differently. We love each other differently. We love other people differently. We always say it's opened our eyes to a whole world of suffering that we didn't know existed.
Yeah,
and I think just having that in our lives, I always say, like, I think as people, like him and I are like changed for the better. It's just poor little Hudson's the one that has to suffer through it. And that's obviously hard to watch, but I think it's been like a very transformational experience for our family and not necessarily all bad, which is what I think you think of. And I think that's totally God's work. I mean, I think if we didn't have Jesus and we didn't have our faith, like, I would just probably be a puddle on the ground and it would be hopeless, but, we have joy in a lot of these moments, and as hard as they are, and to be able to love on, our daughter or our other people or other family members, like while you're going through all this, I think is like part of our testimony. But
Has it helped you have opportunities to tell others about Christ? Because outside world's going to say, how in the world can you think that this is going to be used for good?
Yeah.
But then suddenly that opens up a door, right? I mean, has that happened for you to be able to tell others about what Christ has done?
We try to make that as authentic as possible.
Sure.
We're not trying to proselytize our son on any of this stuff, So I think there is a true joy, a sense of hope. There's a true sense of peace about us that is so divine that we don't have to say anything about it.
Yeah.
It's definitely been more, I have a lot of friends that aren't Christians, and it's been more of like what's the difference? Like, what are you doing? Like, and I'm like, well, come to church with me on Sunday. And it's like, they just sense something different about you. I think that
it opens doors to plant seeds.
Start asking questions.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
That's great. Nate and Lexi Solder, really appreciate you guys being here on the podcast. The last question I want to ask you both, and you can answer it however you'd like, is the greatest lesson that the Lord is teaching you in this season of life right now. You just got back from Uganda, and God has you where he has you for whatever purpose he wants to use it for. But what's the lesson you're learning from him right now? What's he teaching you?
I have a whole list of things I could go over. I was writing as we're coming home on the airplane. And I think in that is just listening. I think it was my ignorance and my self-righteousness, and just to tell people and to talk and always be the one dominating the conversation. And when you sit back and listen, and you see that guy's saying something that connects to that guy, and you just watch as the Holy Spirit's kind of working through the whole deal. And it takes a lot more faith when you just sit back and just observe and learn and just take notes on what's going on around you.
It's really good. Lexi, how about you? What are you learning from the Lord?
I would say, Nate says his prayer for our kids every night is that they would grow up and have a love for other people more than they love themselves.
That's good.
So I think that sort of theme has kind of resonated through our trip. Just having a different worldview of what other people are doing and how other people are suffering, and how we can impact that. I just think God is moving in that way in our lives at the moment. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Just one quick story, because we're sitting there in the slums with this woman and her little daughter, and she said to us, I didn't choose where I grew up. I didn't choose where I was born. You didn't choose where you were born. Our job is just to give back and give what we have. And she's telling me that with nothing. I mean, she's got nothing. Yeah. And that's such a shocking realization that she's willing to give up everything she has, as it says in the Bible, and I'm just giving up my excess. Yeah. So it was humbling, and I felt guilty about it, but I know that God put us here for a reason. So to use that and be good stewards of that is a real challenge for us.
That's great. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much, Nate and Lexi Solder, for joining us here on the podcast. Appreciate you both.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Really good stuff there from Nate and Lexi Solder joining us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. You can follow along on Twitter with Nate. His Twitter handle is Solder Nate, and then Lexi Solder's Twitter handle is just at Lexi Solder, LEXISOLDER. Give them a follow on Twitter. Let them know that you heard their story on the Sports Spectrum podcast, and maybe send them some encouragement or some prayers. But lots of great stuff there, nuggets from them in the podcast, and just praying for their son and praying for their platform. People from the outside may say, well, they have so much money, and sign this very large contract, but what are you doing with it? And for them to go and make a difference through compassion, to go to Uganda, to tell others about Christ, I think that they're making a difference, and they want to continue to point others back to Jesus. And it's such a cool thing what they're doing, and really appreciate them and wish them nothing but the best going forward. And certainly Nate in the 2019 season, a lot of changes with the Giants. It'll be interesting to see how that all plays out in New York and in the NFC East this year in 2019. So many thanks to the Solders for joining us, and many thanks to Compassion International, which we talked about quite a bit on this podcast. The most trusted child development ministry in the world allows you and I to help release a child from poverty and make a difference for
for just $38 a month. You can make the difference through Compassion at their website, compassion.com/sportsspectrum, compassion.com/sportsspectrum. There's a list of children there on the website from all over the world. Your chance to pray about it, talk with your family, go to the website, compassion.com/sportsspectrum, and pray, and then pick the child that you feel God is leading you to sponsor. And there it is, $38 a month, and it releases them from poverty. My wife, my daughter, and myself, we sponsor a 13-year-old boy from Haiti, and it's just been wonderful to be able to pour into him and to be able to sponsor him and provide that access to clean water, vocational training, medical care, just your basic necessities of life, and doing it all through the lens of Christ, the most important thing. So check it out, compassion.com/sportsspectrum, and sponsor a child today. Many thanks to you for listening to this episode of the podcast. Check us out on social media at sports_spectrum, and check out our website, sportsspectrum.com, where all of our content is found, and also an opportunity there for you to subscribe to our Sports Spectrum magazine can be found there, sportsspectrum.com. The magazine's $18 for an entire year. It's a great deal, and it's a great sort of outreach tool to hand to people, to tell them without forcing faith in anyone's face, but to tell them about Jesus through the stories that are being told in sports and in Sports Spectrum. So check out the magazine for $18 for a whole year, sportsspectrum.com, and subscribe today. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time with a brand new episode of the Sports Spectrum podcast. I hope you have a great rest of your day.